Hello coders, this is Jared with Renaissance Coders, and today we are going to be creating another 20-minute tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to focus on creating an island terrain in 20 minutes. I'm going to be moving through this fairly quickly, so if you need to catch up or something, you can always pause the video to follow along. I'm going to be using a lot of the standard assets from Unity, so if you don't have that, be sure to download it. In particular, I'm going to be using the characters, the effects, and the environment packages. I'm going to be using like the palm tree from the environment, the first-person character controller, and a few of the image effects as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. First thing I'm going to do is actually create the terrain, so just go to Game Object, 3D Object, and Terrain. So when we first add in the terrain, it's just going to be this white plane, because we haven't set any height or anything like that. So we're actually going to go ahead, and the very first thing we're going to do is add a texture. And for this, since we're creating an island, we're going to use the Sand Albedo texture. Just go ahead and add that in. You can mess with these settings if you want to. I'm not going to for this tutorial. Okay, so now that we've got that done, the way that I like to create islands is I like to set the terrain to a certain height using the paint height, and then reduce around the outline of the island as much as possible. So to do this, I'm going to actually set the terrain to a height of 10, and then just click on the flatten button, and when I clicked on that, you could see that the terrain actually increased in height. Now if I go to my raise and lower tool, I can bump up the opacity and the brush size. I'm going to go all the way up here. I'm going to go into my top down, zoom out a little bit, and now when I press shift and click, you can see that I am reducing the height of the terrain in these areas, and that's basically what I'm going to do all the way around until I get like the basic outline of an island here. So I'm going to just go to top again, and it may be a little hard to work in the top down for you. I actually prefer it for this particular stage of the project, but whatever works for you. And again, I'm going to be just creating a really small island here, sort of like a uninhabited tropical island, so we're going to reduce a lot through here. I'm going to try to get to like a sort of double crescent looking island with a little bit of the island being covered by water, or like the connecting land bridge between them being covered by water. So as you can see, I've got this down to pretty much one of the grid squares. And now what I'm going to do is drop down my brush size. So I'm going to go down to about half the size I was, a little beneath that. Oh, make sure you're holding shift. And I'm just going to start sort of reducing and fine-tuning the shape of this island a little bit more here. And so basically I'm just going to have this one little piece of island over here, and then I'm going to have a larger section of the island over here. And you can really create the island in any shape you want. It's totally personal preference for this project. I just I like to have like a little swimming hole or maybe a docking area or something right here, and then have a few sections where you can cross through. One last thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to decrease the height along this little connecting part right here. And if you actually drop down the opacity, you can see that you're affecting the terrain in smaller intervals. So if I just shift click, I'm just going to shift and click 3 times right there for now. And now I'm actually going to create an outline around the island, because if you look at pictures of real life islands, it's not like this huge drop off down to from like walkable surface to beneath water. There are a couple of drop off points. And so to do that, I'm going to go back into the paint height tool, and I'm going to actually bump my opacity all the way up and then reduce my brush size. Well, I'm going to actually make this first drop off pretty large here, and for the height I'm going to make it an 8 instead of a 10. And now what I'm going to do is just around the outside of this island here, I'm going to basically paint an outline. And as you can see, it's just a little bit shorter than the island, and don't worry if you've got like creases through here. We can always smooth those out a little bit later. And don't worry if you're really sort of affecting the outline of the island too much, because again, we're going to come back in and tweak this a lot. I'm going to leave this center piece here lower for now. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want this to appear to be deeper than the surrounding parts of the island. So I'm eventually going to have to go back in and decrease this as well. And actually, I'll go ahead and do that now. And to do this, just drop down the height again, and we're just going to go back through one more time and drop down this height. So now we're at a height of 6. And I'm going to drop down my brush size to a fairly smaller brush size here. Make sure I'm getting it pretty close in here. Okay. Cool. Now that might actually be too high when we go back in and look at it a little bit later, but for now that's okay. The next thing I actually want to do is go ahead and add in the water from Unity. So to do that, just go to your environment, water. I like the water 4 prefabs, and just go advanced. We'll drop that in. Now I'm going to actually zero out the positioning, and for scale just set 5, 1, 5. If you do increase the Y scale, it will affect the waves. So if I go with like a 2 here, you can see that the sea just gets a little more choppy. If you go too high, like 22, you get some really crazy looking stuff going on. But I want a fairly calm sea, so I'm just going to set it to 1. Now I'm going to set the X positioning to 250 and the Z positioning to 250. Okay, so now that basically covers our terrain. Now for the Y positioning, this is going to depend on what you set your first brush height to, which I had it set to 10. So if we set it to 10, you can see that it's basically going to be popping up, and the waves are going to be going over most of the island, which is not what we want. We want it to be a little bit beneath this. So I'm actually going to set it to a 9, see how that looks. Okay, that's pretty good right there. We've got these sort of shallows through here. We've got this deeper part, where maybe a ship could come in. Our land bridge is looking a little deeper than it should be, so we'll have to go back in and fix that. So let's go ahead and start on that process. Now I'm actually going to go ahead and hide the water, go back into the terrain, and now we're going to start smoothing everything back out. So to do this, just go brush size 100, opacity 100, and just start smoothing everything out. We're just going to do one big smooth pass, and then we'll come back in and smooth in smaller intervals a little later. Just for right now, I just want to make sure we're creating a very smooth looking island at the beginning. And I've got a little lag here going on. It's probably because it's trying to build out down here. So we're editing and building at the same time, which is a little bit of a pain, but that's okay. Alright, now I've got it pretty well smoothed out here. So if I zoom back in, you can see I've got a really very sort of smooth look going. And again, just turn back on our water, and since we've done that, you can see that our island has actually sort of dropped down a little bit more than we wanted it to. That smoothing really has a heavy effect when the opacity is set to 100. So what I'm actually going to go back in and do now is start raising in much smaller intervals. So I'm going to drop my brush size way down and my opacity way down, and I'm just going to start trying to increase this in some very small, just single clicks through here, trying to get it to pop back up a little bit more. Okay, now you can see that I've got sort of like a bumpy look going over here, whereas this side is really flat. And that's okay if you're going to put like a cabin, or if you're building like a resort or something, because at that point this island would be considered man-made. But I'm going for uninhabited, very natural looking island, so I'm going to have to create some sort of humps or bumps, whatever you want to call them, in the island here. So to do that, I'm just going to again single click through here, and as you can see when I'm doing that, it's just creating these bumps of like sand throughout the island. Now I did actually raise our land bridge a little too high, because now the water is, you know, right up, is not actually crossing or touching through here. And I actually want the water to sort of cover the path right through here. And to do that, you can just shift click and drop down a little bit. Now when I did that, you can see that the waves right here look a little weird, right? The way that they're sort of popping up through here is a little odd. And so you may want to go back in and smooth out the height again through here. And the lower the opacity on the smoothing height, the less of an effect it's going to have. So that's not really much of an effect at all. So I'm going to bump up the opacity a little more. And I'm actually going to start smoothing out these bumps a little more too. It's still not having much of an effect here, so you know, sand is a very smooth surface, really. I mean, especially with all the wind and everything like that on a small island like this, you're going to really have some pretty smooth surfaces. You know, if you're doing a rocky island, it won't be anywhere near this smooth. So again, it's really what you're creating and what you want the look and feel to be. You know, if you want some sort of inhospitable island, then you probably wouldn't do as much smoothing as I'm doing through here. Okay, now I've got this looking okay. Still not awesome, but that's okay for now. Okay, so now if I zoom out, you can see that I've got basically my island, my first drop-off point, and my second drop-off point. One thing that you can do is go back through and add like sand dunes through here if you want to. To do that, it's actually really easy. You can just hide your water and then go back to the top-down perspective and then just do terrain, raise lower. I'm going to go with a slightly lower opacity here and just sort of paint in some little splotches of sand. Oops. Raised sand dunes throughout here. Okay. Alright, and now we're going to go back to our smoothing height, bump that opacity all the way up, and might as well just bump the brush size up. And just smooth those back out. You know, lots of smoothing going on throughout this process. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, so as you can see, I've actually got those a little bit too high. And you can actually just continuously focus on one of these sand dunes and just continuously drop them down like that, or you can click and then just sort of shift click and drop in much smaller intervals here. Kind of like the way that looked. There we go. And again, one more smoothing pass here. Smooth these guys out a little more. Actually, I need to drop that guy down. Okay. Alright, now let's activate our water again, see how that looks. Okay, now as you can see, we've still got a few like sand dunes that are sort of showing up as like some shallows out through here in a few different areas and everything like that. The next thing I want to do is actually add a different texture inside of here. So we're going to do a more rocky texture towards the center of this terrain, and to do that, just click on the paint texture, edit, add texture. And I'm not actually going to go with the cliffs here. Instead, I'm going to go with this mud rocky. There we go. And this one actually comes with normals as well. And we're just going to add that. And now click on it. And you're definitely going to want to drop down your brush size here. So if I drop that down and drop the opacity down a little more, then I can start to paint in. You do have to be careful when you're doing this because you don't want to get it too high up on the island. Pretty easy to fix just by going back in and painting a little later. So I just did my first pass with a lower target strength, and now I'm going to go back in, bump the target strength all the way up, and really cover the bottom of this with the that texture. I'm going to go back to my sand, and we're going to go and just sort of start smoothing out these start blending this in a little bit more throughout here. And because we don't really want that rockiness to be showing up on the edges like that. Okay, so that looks pretty good. If you wanted to, you could take the rocky texture all the way out. I'm just going to do it in the center here. Maybe this is like a volcano or something like that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is actually add some trees. And to do that, we're just going to add the palm trees from the standard assets. So just click on Place Trees, Edit Trees, Add Tree, because we don't have any defined yet. And just type in palm or PA works. Add it in. And I'm going to leave most of these set to the default. I'm going to drop my brush size down considerably and the tree density as well, because I don't really want like a ton of trees on this island. If I drop like that, you can see I'm just getting one tree at a time here. I'm just going to sort of randomly place them throughout this island, because this island isn't going to have a ton of vegetation throughout it, and we don't really want the palm trees getting super close to the water, because that doesn't seem too realistic, does it? Alright, and then just maybe 3 over there, sort of lonely trees. There we go. So that's not realistic either, because they're pretty much growing in a straight line. So we're just going to do like boom, boom, and boom. Alright, now you can add grass as well. So if you just click on your paint details, edit, add a grass texture, and you can do either of these. I prefer the second one. I don't think they have any other grass textures in here really, so yeah, I think I'm just gonna go with the second. Drop down the color on it. I don't really want a super vibrant grass out here. That's not a very good color. Let's just copy this first color they're using, and then we'll reduce this one down a little more. Okay, and reduce the height, because if you don't reduce the height, then it may go over the player. I've had that happen a few times, so I'm going to drop it down to min height 0.5, max height of 1, add that in, and then we're going to change our paintbrush to this sort of splotchy looking brush here, and whoop. The next thing I'm going to do is drop down the brush size considerably, because we don't want a ton of grass on this island. I'm just going to sort of put it around the trees a little bit. Again, just sort of make sure you don't click and drag like I just did there. You'll get some. If you click and drag when you're adding grass, you can just get a ton of grass, which is not what I want for this particular island. And you're gonna be continuously moving your camera, so make sure you're pretty comfortable with the controls in Unity before you start this process. And you will notice that if you're adding grass really far away from the camera, that you won't be able to see it popping up yet. So you want to get pretty close in there when you're doing this process. Okay, that looks pretty good. Oh, missed that guy. I missed that one too. Okay. Now we've got our trees in, we've got our grass in. The next thing I want to do is actually go ahead and add in our player character. And for this one, I'm going to be using the first-person character. So if you just go to Standard Assets, and then Characters, First-person character, Prefabs, I'm just going to go ahead and drop in this first-person controller here. Press the F key to focus, move that guy up, and now if I press play, we can see the island. Okay. Now this looks okay, but it's not great yet, and to make it look really good, you really have to start doing some image effects and things of that nature. So what I'm going to do for this particular scenario is use two image effects. So let's go ahead and go to the standard assets effects, image effects and scripts, and we're going to be using the bloom. Just bloom. Let's make sure, drop that. I'm dropping it on the second one here. So and to see the output, you can actually click on game here, and now you can see what this bloom is actually doing. So if we bump the intensity way up, we get this crazy look, but I don't want it to be that harsh, right? I mean, it is an island, so we are going to have it pretty bright here, and you know, we can drop the threshold down to create an even brighter. If you go high threshold, it looks pretty normal, but I'm going to go with a lower threshold. You know, we can reduce the sample distance or increase it. It's not having much of an effect there. And the other one I'm going to add is the motion blur. Okay, and you're going to want to reduce this motion blur down to about 0.2, I think. Let's see how that looks. So if I press play, let's see how that looks. It looks pretty good. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is actually add one more image effect, and that's going to be the sun shafts. So just drop that down, and you can see what that's sort of doing is it's creating this sort of haze effect on farther away objects, if you will. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is actually add my directional light here as my sun. I haven't done that yet, but I can just very easily click on lighting, drag that in there like that, and we're actually going to make sure we move that guy up into the air sun, because right now it's basically at 0, 0, 0 or 0, 3, 0. So I'm going to go ahead and bump that guy way on up here. And I'm going to actually rotate it a little bit. So that had a pretty good effect, it looks like. You know, so it looks like the haze is gone from this tree now, but it is still over here. Let's make sure I've still got the sunshine. Oh, no, I don't. Okay, there we go. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. The next thing I want to actually do is change the color of this directional light. Now this directional light looks like it's... There we go. It's kind of got a more of a yellow tint, but with a beach scene like this, I really want to go with more of a white tint, so get it pretty close. I've got 255, 252, and 244 here. Let's see what that did. So that's creating just more of a whitish sort of impact on the sand and things like that. So if I press play now, you can see the sun shafts. If I look over at the sun, you can see that it's got a sort of shaft around it as well. You know, we can see our darker texture down there a little bit. See if we can cross this land bridge, see how this turned out. Again, we've got some pretty big bumps here. I mean, you can reduce those if you want. I kind of like the way that the bumps look, you know. It's more natural that way, but it's looking pretty good. Okay, I think that pretty much does it as a basic introduction for creating an island in under 20 minutes. As always, drop us a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more tutorials, and thanks for watching.